Hello, we're Timeline 9, and our topic centers around significant points in Brazilian design history.
During the 19th century, Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo were influential areas for the development of printing and typography in Brazil. Movable type printing started in Brazil in 1808 after the Portuguese court was transferred from Lisbon to Rio de Janeiro, and it was there that the Imprensa Nacional, their printing office, and its type foundry were created. In 1827, Sao Paulo was given permission by the Portuguese court to begin printing with movable type. As one of the more industrialized cities in Brazil at that time, the number of printing offices and newspaper titles there grew rapidly alongside those in Rio de Janeiro. Type specimens were printed as a way of showing potential customers what styles they could choose from, and they are one of the few resources currently available for studying what the type at the time looked like. Although some of the typefaces could have possibly been designed in Brazil, a majority of the ones featured were designed by European artists. Some features of the typography at that time include 3D text with a sharp value contrast that suits woodblock printing, type with thick horizontal strokes and thin vertical strokes that mimic the change of weights created by a calligraphy pen, and a mix of serif and sans serif typefaces with varying weights, styles, and widths.
Brazil has historically struggled to find its own distinct artistic identity. This struggle came to a head in the early 20th century, after the abolition of slavery in 1888. That and the artistic distinctiveness of the rest of the world prompted Brazil to not only criticize its own conservative past, but also to question its own national identity. Because if most things considered Brazilian are emblematic of a conservative past, how can the nation progress culturally? The Brazilian modernist movement, through the 20th century, took the challenge in stride and found their own solution, taking close inspiration from the rest of the art world, but adding a Brazilian twist to all that they touched. Much of Brazil's development of their own unique artistic style directly relates to its long history of colonization and slavery, as well as the influx of immigration during and after World War II. With a populace deriving from nearly every corner of the globe, from its own indigenous people to those from Africa to Europe to East Asia, this cultural blend informed the highly unique art style the country has developed through the decades.
Modernismo was a post-World War I art movement in Brazil that followed the development of modernism in Europe. However, rather than strictly adhering to European conventions, it also incorporated Brazilian themes, styles, and other forms of expression. Said to be the beginning of modern art in Brazil, the Semana de Arte Moderna, the Week of Modern Art, was an event held in Sao Paulo in 1922 that showcased modern art, literature, and music. The group of five, Oswaldo de Andrade, Mario de Andrade, Anita Malfatti, Tarsila do Amaral, and Paulo Menotti do Picchia, were some of the prominent artists and writers who were a part of this event and played a role in shaping Brazilian modernism in general. They worked under the idea of cannibalizing European culture and stylistic practices to create works centered around Brazilian culture and nationalism. The piece of art featured in this slide here is the catalog cover designed for the Modern Art Week. One notable feature of this would be the illustration to the left, where the statuesque figure in the middle is a common feature in a lot of European art, while the plants drawn in the background take inspiration from Brazilian folk art. As Modernismo grew and dwindled throughout the 1920s, the standard for modern art in Brazil became more of a mix between European styles such as Cubism, Expressionism, and Surrealism, and elements found in Brazilian folk art. The movement was considered radical at the time and had the greatest effect on the designs of Brazilian literature, most notably books and magazines. One of these was called Klaxon, the first Brazilian modernist magazine. The publication featured writing in multiple languages as well as frequent experimentation and mixing of styles. The covers of Klaxon were meant to emulate a Russian avant-garde style. One interesting feature of the cover design would be the stretching of the A that allows for it to span across multiple words, and the way that the left side of the A weaves underneath the tilde in Sao. Following World War II, a large number of European immigrants came to Brazil, several of whom brought their European modernist ideals with them. The military dictatorship ruling Brazil at the time also led to an increased influence of American political power on Brazil, and thus the designs being made in America seeped into the Brazilian public eye as well. The Museo de Arte de São Paulo was founded in 1947 by Assis Chateaubriand, Pietro Maria Bardi, and Lino Bobardi. The exhibitions at this art museum played a large role in shaping the Brazilian public's perception of modernism as well as a greater desire for design education. The Instituto de Arte Contemporâneo, Brazil's first design school, was also founded as a companion to the museum. It was inspired by the German Bauhaus and Chicago's Institute of Design and remained open until 1953.
One artistic movement with strong contributions from Brazilian designers is the concretism movement from the 20th century. Concrete art is characterized by geometric and mathematically calculated abstract shapes. Its manifesto was written by Dutch artist Theo van Doesburg in 1930, but was later popularized by Swiss artist Max Bill. Concretism existed globally, but received specific attention and adoption from Latin America. And in the top right, there's some examples of Brazilian artists and their work, and on the bottom right are some examples of the aforementioned artists and their work.
The concrete art movement was a major part of Brazilian design during the 1950s, influenced by the German Bauhaus and Swiss international typographic style. Many of the designs used geometry as a way of abstractly expressing ideas, found interest in form, shape, and color, and employed typical German and Swiss design principles such as asymmetric layouts and grid-based design. The neo-concrete art movement launched in the late 50s and early 60s as a progression from the concrete art movement. While also being geometric, neo-concrete art was more conceptual and expressive in its form and didn't confine itself to a grid-based layout. One example of a neo-concrete designer would be Ligia Pape, who also took inspiration from the shapes and symbols of the indigenous Assarini people in her work. The image to the left contains some symbols and graphics of the Assarini people which were used for body paintings, and the image to the right of it are some of the design works by Ligia Pape that she did for the cookie brand Piraquê in 1960.
Brasilia is the capital of Brazil. Conceived from scratch in an attempt to move the capital away from the coast, Brasilia's architecture is full of bold modernist structures designed by Oscar Niemeyer and finally laid out by Lúcio Costa. Pictured left is the monumental axis, designed by Lúcio Costa. Some other examples of modernism in Brazilian architecture are depicted on screen right now. In the top left is Metropolitan Cathedral, designed by Niemeyer. In the top right is the National Congress of Brazil, also designed by Niemeyer. In the bottom left is Alvorada Palace, also designed by Niemeyer. And in the bottom right is Juscelino Kubitschek Bridge, designed by Alexandre Chan.
Following the establishment of a military dictatorship in the late 1940s, there was a greater push for creative movements and protests for the changes in the political climate. Originally rising in the musical space, Tropicalia became intertwined with art and design. Rogerio Duarte's work of designing album covers and artwork for the movement through the 1960s made him a key figure in pushing it in the limelight and ushering in further design practices with it. The art and design is characterized by the use of bright colors and prints. These are Duarte's works on display at Marginalia 1, an exhibition dedicated to the design work of Duarte, which was put together by Mariana Castillo de Bell and Manuel Ryder. It ran in 2013 and it was restaged in 2018.
Although Brazil's indigenous and folk arts have historically been alienated from the scholarly art world for being perceived as low skill or primitive, gradually they have reached greater cultural and formal acclaim. The 1947 Pernambucan Popular Ceramics Exhibition brought folk figurative ceramics to the same level as works considered high society, although their works were unfortunately exhibited anonymously, and the late 20th century artist Francisco da Silva, often credited as Chico, created colorful, elaborate depictions of both real and fantastical creatures that reached international fame. In the 21st century, many Brazilian architects or architect groups like Juliana Ayako and Gavia Arquitetos embrace indigenous design influences when building structures that collaborate with instead of fight the natural world around them, and utilize sustainable building materials and techniques. In the center is Untitled by Francisco da Silva aka Chico from 1971, and in the top right there's Woman with a Cat, which may be an unofficial title given by the website that I found it on, by Antonio Rodriguez from around 2000, and in the bottom right corner is Cabana Zero by Gavia Arquitetos, just the group, from 2022. On the left is another Untitled by Francisco da Silva aka Chico from 1972, and in the bottom right is Maku Mirações, an exhibition of indigenous Brazilian art collective Maku, short for Honeycomb Artist Movement, and MASP in 2023.
Vernacular typography, or typography of native and colloquial origins, became a mode of expression for Brazilian designers in the late 1990s who wanted to push against colonial conventions. One example of this would be the typeface Brasileiro, designed by Christian Cruz in 1999. It is inspired by hand-lettered signs that can be found across Brazil. Typografia was Brazil's first type publication, founded by Claudia Rocha and Tony Gimarco. It ran for 13 issues from 2000 to 2020 and was used to document both the international and Brazilian type scene.
To close off, we also supplied additional links that are a collection of multiple Brazilian design resources. The first one is Brazilians Who Design, which is a long list of Brazilians who design. It lists their location, area of expertise, and a direct link to their personal site in order to get in touch with them or their work. The second link leads to type foundries made by Brazilian designers that can be downloaded off of Adobe Fonts. Speaking of fonts, this presentation features two Brazilian-made typefaces, Tomorrow by Tony DeMarco and Monica Rizzoli, and Gabarito by Leandro Assis, Alvaro Franca, Felipe Casaprima, and Henrique Bayer.